Cold neon lights flicker over an empty gas station. The metallic snap of handcuffs slices through the night. My mother was lying in a hospital bed after heart surgery, and I was being shoved face first against my own car, treated like a criminal, all because of the color of my skin. My heart pounded, shame burning in my chest. The camera catches the fury and disbelief in my eyes. But what those officers didn't know is that the man they cuffed last night is the very judge sitting high above them in this courtroom today. Silence. The gavel strikes. The officers freeze. This isn't just a trial. This is court revenge. The gavel's echo still lingers in the silence of the courtroom, but to truly understand how I ended up here, staring down the very men who had dragged me across the asphalt only hours before, you need to step back with me into the rhythm of my life, into the city that shaped me, into the family that anchors me, and into the shadows where the seeds of this conflict had been quietly growing long before the handcuffs ever clicked shut on my wrists. Philadelphia in early autumn is a city painted in contradictions. The air carries both the crisp bite of falling leaves and the heavy scent of exhaust fumes drifting from Roosevelt Boulevard, where traffic snarls like a restless beast. Orange and red leaves spiral down against glass skyscrapers, a reminder that beauty and struggle often coexist in the same frame. Street vendors shout about cheesesteaks and pretzels on one corner, while a homeless veteran huddles beneath the marble steps of a bank just blocks away. It is a city of power and vulnerability, history and forgetting, justice and injustice, all colliding in the same square mile. This city is where I was born, where I studied, and where I rose through the ranks of law, until I earned the black robe and the heavy responsibility of being called Your Honor. My name is Marcus Holloway, and at 45 years old, I carry two worlds on my shoulders. By day, I sit elevated above the courtroom, dispensing judgments with the authority of the state. By night, I return home to a quiet colonial house in Chestnut Hill, where the scent of my wife Vanessa's candles fills the air, and where my two children, 17-year-old Jamal and 14-year-old Zora, wait for the kind of father who can somehow shield them from the harsh truths of America. I have spent years trying to straddle these two worlds, the ideal of blind justice and the reality of living in a black body that justice does not always recognize. I had not intended to be at that gas station last night. I had spent the day at Jefferson Hospital, sitting beside my mother's bed after her heart surgery. She is 70, fragile yet fierce, a woman who once marched for civil rights in the 1960s, and who never lets me forget the weight of that inheritance. Hours passed in the sterile hum of machines, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air, until the doctors finally told me she was stable. Relief carried me out into the night. Dressed in jeans and a hoodie instead of my usual tailored suit, I felt almost invisible, just another tired man stopping for gas before heading home. But invisibility is a luxury my skin color does not grant me, not in certain neighborhoods, not under certain eyes. That is how Brennan and Reynolds found me. Two officers with buzz cuts, stern jaws, and restless suspicion written into the way they scanned every shadow. To them, I was not a son leaving his mother's hospital room, not a judge whose rulings they might have read in legal memos, not even a neighbor filling his car. To them, I was a silhouette that matched a description, a hoodie in the wrong place, a black man who had to be explained, controlled, subdued. And so the trap was sprung. But this story is not only about the clash at that gas station. It is about everything that had been simmering beneath the surface long before that night. To understand why my arrest lit a fuse, you must know the people orbiting around me, the relationships that give shape to this moment. First, there is Vanessa, my wife, sharp-minded, a civil rights attorney whose every word cuts with the precision of a scalpel. She balances warmth with fire, holding me accountable as much as she comforts me. Our children see her as both mother and warrior, and often I think she has been preparing for a battle with injustice, long before it came crashing into our own home. Then there is Jamal, my son, tall, restless, with eyes that constantly measure whether the world will ever respect him for who he is. We have had the talk, as every black father must with his son. Keep your hands visible, speak politely, ask permission before reaching for anything. Jamal recited the rules back to me, but behind his eyes, I saw the quiet rebellion, the question he never dared to ask. Why should respect require submission? And Zora, my daughter, still at the edge of childhood and adolescence, watching everything with a sharpness that frightens me. She is the one who notices the tension in my jaw when I return home late from court, the one who catches the news before I do and asks questions I cannot always answer. To her, justice is not abstract. It is whether her father comes home safe, whether her brother avoids a traffic stop gone wrong, whether the system will ever see her family as equal. Beyond my family, there is my community, the neighbors who wave politely, yet whisper when they see a black man walking alone after dark, the colleagues who praise my rulings in chambers but lower their voices when the conversation turns to police misconduct. There is Diane Chen, a fellow judge and trusted confidant, who has stood beside me in countless ethical battles, and who knows the weight of balancing public perception with private conviction. There are men like Captain William Preston, polished in public, evasive in private, who promise reform while protecting their officers behind a wall of bureaucracy. And there are countless citizens like Antoine Johnson, a young nursing assistant who once stood in my courtroom, trembling as he described a traffic stop that mirrored my own. His words had been dismissed by some as exaggeration, but last night, I lived them. Philadelphia has been restless for months. Murmurs ripple through the city about rising stop-and-frisk incidents, about young black men questioned for walking down the wrong block, about quotas whispered in locker rooms. In community meetings, activists demand answers, while city officials offer statistics that smooth over the human cost. Each headline fades into the next, until the injustice becomes background noise. But behind every statistic is a bruise, a humiliation, a child who cannot sleep because of flashing lights in the rearview mirror. That is the soil in which this story is rooted. My arrest was not an isolated mistake. It was the visible crack in a dam already straining under pressure. When Brennan and Reynolds pressed my face against cold metal, they pressed against decades of frustration, fear, and fury carried by an entire community. And when they forced me into the back of their cruiser, they unknowingly carried me into the very heart of the system I had sworn to uphold. Inside the police station, as fluorescent lights stripped away my dignity, I saw the smirks of officers who believed they were untouchable. I heard the whispers. Just another one claiming to be important. But I also saw the flicker of recognition in a young officer's eyes, a rookie named Daryl Jackson, who remembered my lecture on constitutional rights. His hesitation was a crack in the wall of silence, a reminder that not everyone was blind to what was unfolding. That night, when I finally returned home, the house felt different. The candles smelled the same, but their warmth could not mask the chill that clung to me. Jamal confronted me with the video already spreading online, his voice sharp with anger. "Dad, you followed every rule you taught me, and it didn't matter." Zora clung to me silently, her eyes wide, with the knowledge that even a judge could be treated as disposable. Vanessa stood firm, already planning lawsuits and strategies, but behind her steel, I saw the ache of a wife who nearly lost her husband to the arrogance of two officers. It would be easy to tell this story as if it began and ended at that gas station, but the truth is larger, more unsettling. This story begins in the hallways of courthouses where misconduct cases gather dust. It begins in the whispered jokes of officers who see minority neighborhoods as hunting grounds. It begins in the quiet calculations of politicians who weigh outrage against elections. And it begins in my own heart, as I confront the question I had long tried to avoid. Have I, in my role as judge, been too comfortable with a system designed to fail the very people I swore to protect? The city outside does not sleep. The streets hum with traffic. The news cycle spins endlessly, and my name now dances across screens I cannot control. But beneath the noise, something deeper is stirring, a reckoning that neither Brennan nor Reynolds nor even I can contain. I stand at the threshold of a story where justice and revenge blur, where every decision carries the weight of generations. The courtroom awaits, but so does the laughter, the irony, the biting commentary of a world that refuses to stay silent. And as I draw a breath, ready to continue, I can almost hear the shift in tone approaching. Less solemn, more sharp, the voice of humor rising like a blade against the heaviness. Because the next part of this story, as heavy as it is, will not be told in whispers of sorrow alone. It will twist. It will sting. It will bite with irony. The first thing you need to know about courtroom silence is that it's never truly silent. People think it's this solemn, holy quiet, like a cathedral where justice whispers. But really, it's coughs someone's trying to strangle, paper rustling like guilty ghosts, and the squeak of a shoe someone forgot had rubber soles. On this morning, though, it felt different. The silence was a living thing, coiled tight, waiting to see who would slip first. And spoiler alert, it wasn't going to be me. The irony of the situation gnawed at me. Less than 24 hours earlier, I'd been face down on cold asphalt, my cheek pressed into German engineering. Today, those same officers were trying very hard not to look like toddlers caught stealing cookies. If there had been an Olympic medal for sweating while pretending you're confident, Brennan and Reynolds would have taken gold and silver. I adjusted my robe. Yes, the official black polyester blend that somehow manages to be too hot and too drafty at the same time, and glanced at them. Their attorney, Gordon, leaned over whispering legal pep talks like a football coach. Stick to the script, stay calm, don't confess to felonies accidentally. The poor man looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Can't say I wasn't enjoying the show, but then, out of nowhere, came the plot twist. Court reporters live for plot twists. A young bailiff hustled in, whispering urgently into the ear of my clerk. She looked at me like someone about to tell their father they wrecked the family car. "Your Honor," she said, voice wobbling, "there's new evidence. A video." Of course there was. In this age, if you sneeze in public, there are at least 3 angles of it on TikTok. Brennan's head whipped around so fast, I thought he might sue his chiropractor next. Reynolds turned pale, like a man realizing his favorite alibi just tripped and face-planted. The bailiff handed over a thumb drive. Not exactly a sacred artifact, but you could feel the oxygen leave the room. I plugged it in, and there it was. Security footage from the very gas station where I'd been arrested. Not my incident. No, this was from a week earlier. Same officers, same routine. A different black man being harassed with the same lazy matches the description excuse. And here's where the grok side of my brain couldn't resist. I turned to them, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Gentlemen, I see consistency as one of your stronger qualities. Unfortunately, the Constitution isn't graded on repeat performance." The gallery snickered. The officers shrank. Even the stenographer looked like she was trying not to laugh, which is dangerous because stenographers laughing mid-transcription is basically an Olympic event. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because while everyone else was gasping at the footage, I noticed something more troubling. The timestamp. The officers had been at that gas station at 9:17 p.m., roughing up a kid named Antoine Johnson. But their official report claimed they'd been responding to a call across town at 9:30. Unless they discovered teleportation technology in their squad car, somebody was lying. Badly. Now, you'd think this would be a career-ending revelation. But in the twisted funhouse mirror of American policing, it was just Tuesday. Still, it cracked something open. Suddenly, this wasn't just about my arrest. This was about a pattern, a system, a rotten scaffolding everyone pretended was load-bearing. Reynolds must have felt the shift, because he started fidgeting like a man sitting on a hot plate. And then, because fate loves irony, he spoke, out loud, in court. "We were told to do it," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "Excuse me? Did someone just peel back the curtain?" Gordon nearly swallowed his tongue. Brennan glared at Reynolds like he'd just announced their Netflix password in public. "And me?" I leaned forward, savoring the moment, and asked, "Would you care to elaborate, Officer Reynolds? Because vague confessions are so last season." The courtroom erupted, half with gasps, half with nervous laughter. And just like that, the stakes spiked. If Reynolds kept talking, he could burn the whole department down. If he shut up, well, the thumb drive had already lit the match. Meanwhile, in the back row, I noticed a familiar face, Mr. Patel, the gas station manager. He gave me a nod that said, "You'll want to talk to me later." That man had the weary dignity of someone who'd spent years watching injustice play out in line with candy bars and lottery tickets. And now he had receipts. I knew the stakes were shifting from personal humiliation to systemic exposure. And with that shift came risk. If I pushed too hard, I wouldn't just be putting Brennan and Reynolds on trial. I'd be putting myself there too. Already whispers were floating around the courthouse. Conflict of interest. He's too close. Maybe he should step aside. If I failed here, I wouldn't just lose this case. I could lose my robe, my career, the only thing standing between me and the abyss of irrelevance. But failure wasn't just about me. It was about Jamal, who'd looked at me with that fire in his eyes and asked why the rules never protected us. It was about Zora, who needed proof the system wasn't just another bully in uniform. It was about Vanessa, who deserved more than a husband who folded under pressure. Losing meant proving every cynic right. That justice was just a word we carved in marble to make ourselves feel civilized. So I doubled down. I ordered the video admitted into evidence. Gordon sputtered objections like a lawnmower trying to start. Brennan crossed his arms, a sulking child in uniform. And Reynolds? Reynolds looked like a man who'd finally realized the thin blue line was more like a noose tightening around his own neck. The humor in me couldn't resist needling them. "You know," I said, "I keep hearing about these mysterious broken tail lights. Funny how they only seem to break when certain people are driving." Laughter rippled through the gallery again. For a moment, the tension eased, replaced by something sharper. Recognition. People saw through the charade, and once you see the strings on a puppet, you can't unsee them. But just when I thought the day had peaked, it happened. The door slammed open, and in walked a reporter, breathless, clutching her phone like it was the Ark of the Covenant. She whispered to my clerk, who paled, then handed me the phone. Breaking news. The video of my own arrest had gone viral, not just local viral, national. My face, pressed against the hood of my BMW, looped endlessly on cable news. The caption screamed, "Judge arrested in gas station stop, racial profiling." So now, I wasn't just presiding over a courtroom, I was presiding over America's dinner tables. The stakes weren't a single ruling. They were headlines, hashtags, reputations. And let me tell you, hashtags are harder to control than contemptuous lawyers. I set the phone down, my hands steady even as my stomach flipped. I knew what this meant. Every word I spoke from here on out would echo far beyond this room. And in that moment, the absurdity of it all hit me. Yesterday, I was just a tired son pumping gas. Today, I was a trending topic. Tomorrow? Who knew? The irony would have been hilarious if it weren't so deadly serious. But that's Grok-style justice for you. Laugh so you don't cry. I looked at Brennan and Reynolds, sweat gleaming on their brows, and thought, you picked the wrong black man at the wrong gas station on the wrong night. And then I thought, or maybe you picked exactly the right one. Because beneath the jokes, the snickers, the sarcasm, something dangerous was brewing. The stakes were no longer personal, they were national. And the question wasn't just whether I would win this case. It was whether the system itself could survive the truth. The silence thickened again. Brennan glared at me with a rage that could have melted steel. Reynolds looked ready to collapse under the weight of his conscience. The gallery leaned forward, sensing the tipping point. And I realized the real battle hadn't even started yet. The night before the second day of hearings, Philadelphia sounded like a city practicing for a storm. Buses sighed, a siren stitched a single red thread through the dark, and the street lamp outside our bedroom window cast a square of pale gold across the ceiling that looked suspiciously like a jury box. I watched the shadows move and tried not to assign them names: fear, duty, pride, anger. Sleep offered a plea deal I could not accept. Rest now, think less, feel later. I lay awake. Cymbals sleep easily. They are flat and do not bruise. Hammers sleep easily. They have only one purpose. I was neither. I was a man who had been cuffed against his car and a judge who would sit above the men who did it. Those truths were not contradictions. They were weights on the same scale, and before morning, I needed to decide whether I could keep the balance from tipping into revenge. Downstairs, the kettle hissed. Vanessa stood at the stove in an oversized Howard sweatshirt, hair tied back, eyes that had argued with the news and won. We met in the kitchen without preface. "Networks want to comment," she said, handing me a mug. "Let them want." Steam fogged my glasses. Tomorrow requires silence. Tomorrow requires precision, she said. Then, after a beat, and courage. We did not touch. The space between us held what touch would have said. I'm scared. I'm with you. Do not carry this alone. We drank our tea, the oldest ritual we owned, and listened to the house remember our children's footsteps. When we set the cups in the sink, we were the people we had been the night Jamal was born, two adults standing on the edge of a life that would not return what it took. At dawn, the city lifted its voice. Wet leaves hissed under tires, a trash truck clanged like a blacksmith at work on the day, and outside the courthouse a small nation assembled. Cameras, signs, umbrellas, hope. In chambers my robe hung on its hook like a patient sea. I touched it and felt the ordinary roughness of cloth. Justice is not a feeling, I told myself. It is a posture you hold long enough to become true. Sophia, my clerk, entered with a stack of motions tall enough to ask for its own chair. Recusal petitions multiplied overnight, she said. The union filed for emergency relief. The DA wants to limit scope. Security is aware. The law is also aware, I said, and signed what needed signing. Fear tries to shrink the world to a procedural question. The task today was to keep the world its actual size. Courtroom 4B breathed like a living thing. The gallery was full of faces that had learned to sit near exits. Reporters' pens hovered as if the air had become ink. Brennan and Reynolds took their seats with Gordon between them, like a negotiator at a family dinner gone wrong. Reynolds's eyes flicked toward me and away, the glance of a man who knows which way his compass points but dreads the terrain. Brennan stared forward with the stubborn posture of a fortress that has not yet heard the first crack. Before testimony, I addressed the motions. Emergency relief denied, scope narrowing denied, exclusion of the gas station footage denied subject to foundation. The denials were not a performance. They were small, deliberate taps on stone, chiseling the outline of a truth that had been trapped in marble long enough. Officer Jackson returned to the stand. His voice had the steadiness of a bridge. He described the lessons that wore polite names, vigilance, proactivity, productive stops, and translated them into what they meant in practice. The pressure to find reasons after the fact, the phrases that dissolved doubt. When I heard furtive movements, he said, I learned it meant the report had already decided who someone was. I asked who trained him, how initiative was measured, when he realized language had been taught to outrun meaning. He answered carefully, choosing words the way a medic chooses instruments. At mid-morning, a plain envelope waited on my chamber's desk. Inside, a photocopied memo on department letterhead, months old. The language wore camouflage, activity benchmarks, deployment priorities, engagement goals. But the table at the bottom did not. Targets by shift and precinct, with a familiar initial in the corner, WP Captain William Preston. I felt the body's old answer to danger, a gathering at the diaphragm, a narrowing of attention. I could have called for a continuance. I did not. Preston walked to the stand with a smile trained at podiums. Under oath, he tried to speak in fences, policy words designed to keep testimony grazing in safe fields. I placed the memo before him and asked how benchmarks differed from quotas in effect. He described mentoring and support. And when officers do not meet these numbers, I asked. Silence found a chair between us. Their reviews reflect it, he said finally. Assignments become limited. Do you recognize your initials? He did. Who instructed you to implement this schema? Names are the last currency a system spends. He spent none. The weather darkened as if called to witness. Rain tapped the high panes like an impatient juror. The gallery thickened with umbrellas and resolve. Somewhere near the back, Vanessa took a seat between our children. I did not need to see them to know how Jamal held his jaw when he was trying not to be angry, or how Zora folded her hands when she wanted to hold on to something solid. Mr. Patel, the gas station manager, testified next, wearing the humility of a man who has measured his words against the cost of saying them. He spoke of small nights and smaller indignities, of the way suspicion had learned his schedule. Then he lifted a small external drive like an offering. Insurance keeps 14 days, he said. I kept more. He looked down at his hands. 14 days is for accidents. This felt like policy. We watched the videos with the storm helping the room go dim. The light from the screen washed faces into the same pale color. Time after time. Approach, pretext, command, escalation. Not every stop was wrong, and that was the most damning thing. How the unacceptable hid itself among the acceptable, like a counterfeit coin in a handful of change. In one clip, a teenager turned toward a friend's phone and asked the camera, "What look means I get to be left alone?" His voice cracked on alone. It hung in the air after the clip ended. A question that did not understand it had become evidence. I recessed for 10 minutes to let the room breathe. In chambers, the city blurred behind rain. Sophia's knock was soft. "Officer Reynolds requests to confer," she said, "with counsel present, on the record." He entered as if apology had a weight to carry. His attorney hovered. The court reporter lifted her hands, ready to catch words before they could try to run. Reynolds's palms were open. "I want to correct the record," he said. He described the vocabulary of convenience. The way matches the description required no description. How high crime area could be glued onto any block by the right fear. He spoke of pressure shaped like praise and evaluations that measured volume more than legality. Then, almost to himself, "When we brought you in, I knew who you were. I said nothing." Shame arrived without theater and sat down. We returned to the bench with the geometry of the room subtly altered. Brennan's posture softened by degrees you could miss, unless you were watching for Mercy's first movement. I asked for closings. Rivera rose, small in stature, unembellished in argument. She traced the pattern from policy to pavement to person and sat. Gordon stood and, for once, did not try to outrun the facts. He asked for the difference between punishment and repair, for the chance to change without being destroyed. Alone behind the low wall of the bench, I wrote, "It is a dangerous place, that little rectangle of solitude, where a judge must decide whether the impulse in the hand is to heal or to strike. Revenge is fast and feels like certainty. Judgment is slow and feels like doubt held to the light until it admits what it is." I held the doubt. I thought of my cheek on the cold hood, of my mother's hand in the hospital, of Jamal's question and Zora's silence, of the young officer who remembered my lecture, and the older one who could not remember his oath without help. When I returned, every sound seemed newly specific. The gavel's wood against wood, the shuffle of a shoe that needed repair, the rain applauding because it knows only how to fall. I read the findings, violations established, practices implicated, remedies necessary. The orders were scaffolding, not spectacle. Body camera footage to independent civilian review, performance metrics rewritten to measure constitutional compliance rather than volume. Training reorganized to begin with what a citizen is owed, not what an officer is feared to face. A civilian board with subpoena power to audit stops and patterns quarterly. The record would hold not just what had happened, but what must happen next. The room held still for a breath that tasted like metal. Then sound returned in layers. A sob near the back, the scratch of a reporter's quickened pen, the startled exhale of a man who had not known he was holding his air hostage. Brennan stood and tried to speak apology until the word exhausted itself. "I will do the work," he said instead. Reynolds sat with his face in his hands. Jackson's shoulders let down the inch they had carried all morning. Preston looked older because truth had finally asked him to keep its age. We recessed. The bailiff's announcement floated over a room learning to become ordinary again. People gathered their umbrellas and their opinions. Outside, the storm slackened into a steady rain that polished the courthouse steps. In chambers, I sat alone long enough to let my hands tremble, then long enough for them to stop. I signed the public statement Sophia placed before me and stood at the window to watch the crowd become individuals again, an activist folding a sign, a reporter checking a battery, a grandmother taking a slow breath before the stairs. Vanessa texted, "We're outside." I wrote back, 2 minutes. I removed the robe. It left a warm outline on my shoulders and the faint smell of rain the fabric had collected. On the hook, it looked exactly as it had in the morning, a piece of cloth. The work is never the robe. It is the posture you manage to keep when you take it off. The hallway hummed with fluorescence and the low tide of voices receding. My steps echoed toward the service exit. At the far end, a figure waited in the half light, undecided whether to approach or retreat. Reynolds, alone. He straightened when he saw me and then looked past me, as if measuring whether the decision behind me would catch him. "Your Honor," he said, voice low but not whispering. "There's something I didn't say in open court." The corridor narrowed. Rain gathered its patience on the windows. "What is it?" I asked. "The memo you showed Preston. It's not the only directive. There's another, higher up. If I bring it to you, it won't just change this case. It will change what we think we're allowed to say out loud." He opened his empty hands as if to show he was not hiding anything. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I can put it in yours." Between us, the building held its breath. The storm stilled, as if listening for whether courage would speak again. And in that quiet, I understood that the peak we had reached was not a summit, but a ridge, with one more climb waiting and a fall on either side. Rain hammered against the courthouse steps like a drumline announcing the finale. The city was restless, cameras flashing like lightning, reporters barking questions into microphones as though words could capture what had just happened inside. I moved quickly, my robe still damp with the weight of judgment, my pulse thudding in sync with the storm. Cut 2. Brennan and Reynolds, escorted down the side corridor, their faces pale, hollowed out, no longer defiant. The crowd jeered, some shouted justice, others shouted shame. Every flashbulb etched their defeat into history. Cut 2. Vanessa gripping my hand outside, her eyes sharp but wet. Jamal standing taller than I'd ever seen him, Zora clutching her mother's sleeve like it was armor. They weren't just watching a case. They were watching me hold a line none of us believed would ever be drawn. Cut 2. The press conference. I stood at the podium, microphones like bayonets aimed at my chest, my voice steady, my words clipped. This was never about one night. This was about a system. And today, that system has been told. Accountability is not optional. Fast cuts, applause, shouts, the thunder overhead swallowing every sound. For a second, I thought the storm itself was listening. But then, darkness. The feed cut, cameras scrambled, the courthouse lights flickered. And in that sudden, fragile pause, a single phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. No caller ID. I answered. Static. Then a voice, low, deliberate. "Judge Holloway, you think this ends here?" The line crackled, distorted, as though the storm was trying to drown it out. "There's another memo, higher than Preston, higher than anyone you've faced. If you push further, you won't just lose your career. You'll lose everything." The call ended. Cut 2. My reflection in the courthouse glass, rain streaking down, splitting my face into fragments. In one shard, I was the judge. In another, the son who'd held his mother's hand at the hospital. In another, the man pressed against the hood of a car. The storm outside looked exactly like the storm inside. I turned back to my family. Vanessa's voice. "What is it?" Jamal's stare, demanding honesty. Zora's whisper, "Dad?" I couldn't answer. Not yet. Not until I knew how deep this went. Fast cuts. Preston burning papers in a dim office. A rookie officer scrolling through secret group chats full of instructions. A shadowy figure slipping an envelope into a mail slot marked "Confidential. Judge Holloway." Final cut. My desk at home. The envelope waiting. Unmarked. Sealed. Heavy. I stared at it. The rain still pounding against the windows. My heart pounding in time. Voiceover. Court revenge was never the end. It was only the opening move. Smashed to black. 2 words lingered, etched in silence. To be continued.